Our story begins in the Chronicles of the Seven-Colored World, a simple tale of destruction that befell another world, where a high school student from Earth named Lee Jun-woo was reincarnated as Abel and set out to save a world that had been utterly devastated. However, the balance of power in that world was so unstable that the hero's survival alone could be considered a miracle. There were also obsessive heroines who tried to kill him for the slightest mistake. On top of that, he had to face a secret organization that appeared from time to time with the intent of destroying the world. He was also forced to deal with allies who constantly stabbed each other in the back. The work faced a flood of criticism and insults, yet some readers found within it a peculiar charm amidst its grotesque and messy plot, and clung to it with genuine enthusiasm. The protagonist of our story was one of them, wondering if he had been thrown into that insane world just like Lee Jun-woo. Could he still smile the way he did now? We then move to a battlefield where Rodion Shale, the one in charge of spare weapons for his team, rushes toward them the moment he's called. It doesn't take him long to realize he's in serious danger as a massive rock monster targets him, and he feels like he could be flattened into tomato juice with a single blow. Yet by some miracle, he dodges the attack and continues his sprint toward his fellow warriors. He hands the spare sword to the fighter, Eidos, who yells at him in frustration for arriving late, then heads to the defender, Colin, and gives him the spare shield. Colin immediately orders him to stand behind him. Rodion wasn't impressed by the way they spoke to him, considering he had just risked his life to bring them their weapons. At that moment, without Rodion noticing, another rock giant appears behind him and swings a heavy punch in his direction. Eidos quickly moves in to block the blow and shield him. Colin follows up from behind to intercept the rest of the attack, buying enough time for Eidos to cut off the monster's arm. Rodion stands behind Colin, grateful, remembering how the two of them had always been there to save him. Eidos then channels his sword's energy and unleashes a powerful strike, cleaving the rock beast in half. Rodion is startled as parts of the shattered monster fall toward him, forcing him to leap aside quickly to avoid being crushed. He wasn't pleased with his situation, barely surviving every dangerous encounter since arriving in this world. He reflected that it had been 3 years since he started living in this body, waking up one day as a 14-year-old orphan surrounded by unfamiliar faces. In his darkest moments, lost in a strange and mysterious world, the only thing that helped him endure were the memories of Rodion, the body's original owner, that had become his own. During his first month in this world, he tried every possible way to return to Korea, but soon realized it was nothing more than a distant, unreachable dream. Back in the present, amidst the battle, Rodion snaps out of his memories. He turns towards someone who appeared right after the fight ended, calling out to the knights of House Iscar and announcing that the sacred sword and the treasure awaited them inside. He assured them that nothing could stop them, not even weak monsters like the ones they had just faced. And it's then that we meet this man, Karain von Iscar, the young lord of the Iscar estate. This foolish young man who merely played the role of cheerleader during battles was in fact Rodion's master, and the soldiers were fired up by his spirited words. Rodion warned him that raising his voice would attract monsters, but Karain confidently insisted that no creature would dare touch someone as mighty and noble as himself. Rodion couldn't help but feel disheartened to see such a fool in a position of power, and wished he had been reincarnated into the body of a useless noble's son in a family like that. He sat down on the ground, overwhelmed by tears as he thought about his awful luck of ending up in the story of the Chronicles of the Seven-Colored World rather than any other tale. He believed that the world of the Chronicles of the Seven-Colored World, to which he had been transported, was anything but ordinary. Its chaotic nature meant that it was destined to be destroyed 3 times according to the progression of the story. He had entered this world as an insignificant side character, in a place where wiping out a city or even an entire country was treated by some villains as nothing more than a light snack. Just as he was drowning in sorrow over his reality, a group of monsters appeared, prompting the knights and warriors of House Iscar to prepare for battle. Rodion, however, was still dreaming of surviving in this perilous world and couldn't understand why he had even joined them in venturing into a monster-infested dungeon like this. The scene then shifts to Rodion receiving a slap across the face from someone blaming him for failing in his duties, which had led to the truth reaching the Count's ears. It turns out that the one who struck him was Countess Louisa of House Iscar, who questioned whether the purpose of appointing a commoner like him wasn't precisely to prevent such situations. Rodion could only offer a quiet apology. She warned him that if anything were to happen to Karain because of his negligence, she would reduce him to dust. That angered him deeply. Most of the disasters they faced were caused by Karain himself, yet he never seemed to take responsibility for his actions. Rodion wondered if he should simply quit this job, or go further and eliminate the one responsible for all these disasters, ending the chaos once and for all. Karain, known as the eldest son of Count Iscar and the future ruler of these borderlands, had a notorious reputation for being a disgrace. No one in the region was unaware of his worthlessness. Rodion returned to his room, worn out by the never-ending stream of troubles brought upon him by that fool named Karain. Each time Rodion warned Karain about a problem he had caused or a mission requested by the family, it always ended the same, Karain dumping the task on him and ordering him to handle it alone. One day, Rodion informed him that the Count was furious upon discovering his contact with the underworld. Karain was about to brush it off and tell Rodion to deal with it as usual, but suddenly paused, realizing that the Count had already found out. Panic began to set in as Karain sensed that the Count understood the gravity of the situation, and he realized he was in real trouble. Rodion exploded in anger. This was the 5th time in a single month that Karain had created a disaster, and he had ended up shouldering the blame again. He reminded Karain that he had warned him about associating with people from the underworld, saying it would only bring harm. He couldn't believe such a major crime had occurred in the short time he'd been away from work. Rodion couldn't understand why he was being treated like this, or why Karain insisted on dragging his name through the mud by involving him with the scum of the underworld, people whose influence was like a plague eroding the foundations of the empire. And yet, that wasn't the end of the disaster. Since Karain was the son of the local ruler, the situation escalated when certain nobles from the central territories caught wind of it, and the news quickly spread all the way to the capital. Karain, clearly tense, claimed that he had joined those people to get close to them and eventually trap the leader of the underworld gang. But Rodion challenged him, asking whether he really believed he could present this mess as some patriotic mission, just to avoid punishment. Rodion explained that during that period, there had been a sharp rise in illegal activity along the borders: slave trafficking, drugs, and loan sharks. For that reason, the central government had demanded strict surveillance of all regions and provinces. But Count Iscar had refused their intervention and even barred the imperial administrative delegation from entering his territory, insisting there was no cause for concern. Rodion knew all this, and that's why he lashed out at Karain in fury. Thanks to him, the Count's eldest son had given the central government the perfect excuse to interfere in all affairs of the region. He no longer knew how to proceed. If Karain became entangled in this crisis, there was a high chance Rodion would be punished as well. He felt he had already reached a major turning point, one that he shouldn't have had to face until the main plot of the story had even begun. Rodion began to imagine the punishments that might await them, including the possibility of the young Lord Karain being stripped of his title and having his head shaved, before both were sent off to a monastery as a form of penance. He thought of Nevin, the capital where imperial authority reigned supreme, and how such incidents were deemed grave offenses there, ones that warranted the most basic punishment: public execution by beheading. If it came to that, his own head would roll too. He concluded that the only way to survive this crisis was by revealing everything he knew about the actions of the Count's good-for-nothing son. Karain and Rodion then went together to meet the Count, hoping to resolve the disaster they had stumbled into. That was when Lord Ricard von Iscar appeared, the Marquis of Iscar lands. Behind him stood a man who glanced at Rodion with a look filled with pity, as if he could see the toll that Karain had taken on him. That man was Derek Winhausen, commander of the Lionheart unit, the Count's personal force. Rodion immediately understood his expression and silently thanked him for always understanding the harsh circumstances he faced. But Derek soon shifted his expression to one of disappointment, disapproving of Rodion's failure to prevent such a disaster. Rodion replied with a look that suggested there was little he could have done, especially since the idiot had acted behind his back. Still, Derek signaled that more was expected from him. Count Ricard told his son that he had heard from the head butler about the serious trouble he had caused this time. He asked whether Karain knew the identity of the people he had contacted from the underworld, but Karain had no response. That's when Ricard revealed that it was one of the organizations currently being hunted by the 5th Division of the Imperial family's direct knights. Rodion was shocked upon hearing this. Tension gripped him as he realized the situation was far worse than he had imagined. The involvement of Imperial knights meant the people Karain had contacted were far beyond the usual threat, and now House Iscar owed a great debt to the Imperial family. Ricard ordered his son to prepare for departure to the monastery. Karain tried to object to the sentence. Ricard reassured him that the punishment wasn't permanent. It would be a period of reflection lasting no less than 5 years. Rodion had anticipated a punishment like this. It was the bare minimum Karain deserved for the disgrace he brought upon the Count. According to Rodion's calculations, the main story of the Chronicles of the Seven-Colored World would begin in about 5 years. By then, the continent would be engulfed in a brutal war, soaked in blood. He saw himself as a leaf drifting in the wind, carried toward a bleak future. Karain pleaded for a chance to make amends, promising to make a great contribution in the family's name, one that would erase this disaster and bring honor back to House Iscar. But Ricard told him that even such a contribution wouldn't stop the imperial family from getting involved, unless it truly was something extraordinary. Karain responded by saying he would retrieve the sacred sword, Daylight, which left Ricard stunned and struggling to believe what he had just heard. Rodion looked at Karain and thought the man had lost his mind. The dungeon where that sword lay was impossibly difficult, as if Karain were summoning the god of death prematurely. Karain explained that the appearance of the underworld agents had originated from a leak about the dungeon's location. He went on to say that if they could recover Daylight, the sacred sword of the Duchy of Delphion, they would earn the duchy's support. Rodion knew Karain was trying to piece together a convenient story to save himself, but there was no way underworld agents had come all this way just to explore a dungeon. He explained that dungeon raids were never that simple, referencing the Belly of Apophis incident, where a dungeon contained the sealed evil god Apophis, and cult followers were trying to resurrect him. To suppress them, an army of 100,000 was mobilized, marching with resolve toward their target. In the end, they were all consumed inside Apophis's stomach, and the event became a grim lesson on how dangerously unpredictable dungeons could be. He pointed out that after that incident, it became mandatory to send a scouting unit before attempting any dungeon raid, making it unthinkable that the Count would approve such a reckless idea. Ricard tried to explain that the dungeon in question had an undefined difficulty level, and even with all his power, he couldn't suppress it, despite it lying within his territory. Karain insisted to his father that he would succeed in this mission, pleading with him this time to place his trust in him. Ricard remained silent for a while, unable to say no after witnessing the unwavering determination in his son's eyes. Rodion believed that even the slightest chance of losing their entire force, including the heir to the family, should make such a gamble unthinkable, unless the Count had truly lost his mind. Yet he was stunned when he heard the Count agree to Karain's request. Ricard told his son that he would trust him one last time. He would be accompanied by 30 knights under the command of Derek, and was instructed to ensure the retrieval of the sacred sword, Daylight, if he was truly that confident. Rodion grew anxious as he realized the matter was being taken seriously. He tried to add a comment, but the Count cut him off and told him to make sure his son was kept safe. Ricard then turned back to Karain, expressing his trust and asking him not to let his father down. Karain responded with confidence, promising to return safely with the sacred sword. The Count was deeply proud of him. But to Rodion, it felt as though he were surrounded by lunatics. Overwhelmed by the absurdity of the situation, he broke into tears, trapped in a nightmare created by the reckless actions of fools. We return to the moment when monsters emerged from the dungeon. Derek called out to his knights, ordering them to prepare for battle. He stood in shock at the sight of a minotaur appearing so early on, realizing that this wasn't going to be as easy as they had anticipated. He wondered aloud what might await them deeper inside if such threats appeared at the very start. He prayed for strength in what was to come, while Rodion stood behind him, wearing an odd smile as he observed the monster's strength. It became clear that Rodion was relieved. The monsters emerging from the dungeon weren't on the same level as the ones from the main story of the Chronicles of the Seven-Colored World. He recalled how, by this point in the story, high-ranking demons or ancient weapons usually appeared, and the only option was to flee at full speed. He explained that as long as the enemies were ordinary monsters like the Minotaur, the dungeon remained within manageable difficulty. This gave them real hope of overcoming the threat with their current forces. Indeed, the knights succeeded in defeating the Minotaur with relative ease through coordinated teamwork. Derek then ordered his knights to advance. Meanwhile, Rodion found himself conflicted, unsure of what to do, especially knowing that, according to the original story, the continent would be destroyed in just 3 years due to the Demon War, and humanity itself would be wiped out within a decade. Still, he figured there was enough time left before the end of the world to gather a massive fortune and disappear into the mountains. He was determined to craft his happy ending with his own hands. At that moment, Karain raised his voice inside the dungeon, claiming their path had been smooth and easy so far. He added that if they kept progressing at this rate, they would not only recover Daylight, but also claim the vast treasures hidden inside the dungeon. Derek, however, warned him that making such noise was dangerous. Karain brushed it off, saying there was no need to worry, and that he feared nothing that might come out of the dungeon. No sooner had he spoken than the ground above them began to shake violently. As they looked up, they were met with falling rocks collapsing from above. Derek panicked and announced that they had walked into a trap. Monsters appeared before and behind them, stone golems closing in, cutting off all routes of escape or advance. Derek commanded the knights to break through the siege by force. He ordered the first unit to engage the golems and push them back while the others protected the young lord. Rodion grabbed Karain and dragged him toward an open escape path, but Karain remained frozen in shock, his mind overwhelmed by the screams of his knights echoing behind them. Rodion was caught off guard when the golems began chasing after them as well. Derek managed to intercept the monsters pursuing Karain. He and another knight worked together to hold the creatures back, but they failed to notice one of the golems slipping past them undetected. The monster reached Karain and leapt at him. True to form, Karain froze, unable to react, and cried out to Rodion for help. Rodion grabbed him and pushed him out of the golem's path. Karain was deeply moved by this heroic act, overwhelmed with gratitude toward Rodion for saving him at the last possible moment. Rodion had saved Karain simply because, in his current position, he was just a servant bound to him. If Karain died, then his own fate would be sealed as well. But to his surprise, the golem grabbed him first. With terrifying strength, the monster hurled him off the edge of a cliff. Both Derek and Karen stood frozen in shock, unable to act in time to help. As Rodion plummeted, he screamed desperately for a status window, as if he were still inside a game.
Right now, your brain's still open, still listening. That means I have one last chance to tell you something important. You didn't find this video by accident. Something pulled you here, so trust that instinct. Like the video, it locks in the value. Comment something, anything. It gives your mind closure. And hit subscribe, or don't. But if you don't understand this, you'll forget this moment, this channel, and you'll search for something like it again, but you won't find it. This is where that search ends. So act before your window closes.